Sky News has obtained previously unreleased cabinet documents which suggest that the Thatcher government tried to avoid responsibility for the contaminated blood scandal. In the 1970s and 80s, some 2,400 people, many of them haemophiliacs, died as a result of receiving blood transfusions contaminated with HIV and hepatitis C, the blood products sourced in the United States. Well, our health correspondent Paul Kelso has this exclusive report.
Contaminated blood is the greatest public health scandal in NHS history. Thousands of haemophiliacs were infected with HIV and hepatitis C after being given blood products imported from the United States. An estimated 2,400 people died. Among them was Jonathan Evans. When he died in 1993, his son Jason was just 4. Now, he's searching for the truth.
It destroyed the family at the time. The more I learn with each document, with each discovery, the more you see that actually this was completely avoidable.
Victims have always said the deaths would not have occurred if the UK had made enough of its own blood products. Now Jason has uncovered a previously unseen cabinet memo from 1987, which appears to set out a deliberate policy of avoiding responsibility. It was written following a meeting of the Cabinet AIDS Subcommittee by the then Secretary of State for Social Services, John Moore. In the memo, he accepts that the victim's case is difficult to refute convincingly in presentational terms. He goes on to recommend offering £10 million in financial support via the Haemophilia Society because it would be consistent with the policy of not accepting any direct responsibility for damage caused in this way. We showed the document to Lord Owen, who as Health Minister in the 1970s proposed that Britain should be self-sufficient in blood products, only for the plans to be dropped when he left office.
Well, I definitely think they have a responsibility, and personally I think there is a strong case that they have a liability, and they admit that in this cabinet paper when they say it will be very hard to refute, and I think it has already proven to be hard to refute. I hope the government now, having decided they're going to do something about it, cuts through all this legal arguments and comes up with a generous settlement.
The Department of Health declined to comment on these cabinet papers. It does say the government has commissioned an inquiry into what it calls a scandal. But 3 months after Theresa May made that announcement, the families are still waiting for a chairman to be appointed, and the terms of reference, the format and the timing have not been decided.
This former health secretary has backed the campaign for an inquiry.
It shows that the government from the beginning was trying to fight any real justice for those victims, even though the papers acknowledge that the government had liability. So these are quite shocking revelations, and they strengthen the case for a full inquiry to proceed without any further delay.
Here it's kind of in black and white that we've been told for 20 years one thing, but actually Secretary of State 1987 was saying quite the opposite to that, and it's never been made public until now. And so I think if that isn't a cover-up, then what is?
To try and answer that question, Jason and 500 other victims are suing the government as their search for truth and justice goes on. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Well, Paul Kelso is with me now. So this is the government. It did make some payments to the victims, but it didn't say it was responsible, if you like.
Absolutely. The government has never paid compensation technically. It has provided financial support, as it was termed, down the years to many of the victims and their families. It's in return for that always requested the families waive any right to legal action. And that attempt to hold the ring by the government is weakening as anger has grown at the full scale of what's happening here. And we have two things now happening. There is an inquiry that the Prime Minister has promised, but very little action. And there is separately a big group action against the Department of Health being brought.
Now, this happened, John Moore was the Secretary of State. Some people may have forgotten him. He was a Thatcherite golden boy briefly. But the reason why they did it was because blood products were in short supply, so they went to outside sources.
Absolutely. The UK was not self-sufficient, as the phrase went, in blood products that could help clot haemophiliacs blood, bluntly, so they had to import it from the United States. It was sourced by commercial companies who bought it from anyone who would give it cheaply: prisoners, sex workers, drug users, the highest risks for HIV. This committee was discussing it because back in the 1980s, AIDS was a huge issue that the government was facing, and this was an attempt to try and make up for something that should never have happened. David Owen there, the Labour Health Minister, he announced in the Commons in his time that the UK would become self-sufficient. He was then out of office, and the policy was just dropped. And that is the issue that the families say is fundamental here. The government was negligent.
So what do the families want, the families who've uncovered this now? What do they want to happen next?
They want two things. Those who are suing the Department of Health are seeking recompense for negligence. They want the inquiry to really look at what they say from the start has been a cover-up.
There is already an inquiry.
An inquiry has been announced by the Prime Minister. It was announced in July following some political pressure that was building. 3 months on, no chairman, no terms of reference, no timing. The families do not want the Department of Health involved at all because they believe they were culpable. I believe there's an argument in Whitehall about who should be responsible for running this, so there's a bit of civil service stasis going on. Ultimately, they want to know things like David Owen and the subsequent Health Secretary. All their documents are missing. David Owen has told us he believes it's hard to believe that someone hasn't gone through those files and removed documents. Documents have been destroyed. There's been a lack of candour. So they want to go right back to the beginning of this inquiry and finally settle the truth of something that began 40 years ago.
Paul Kelso, thank you very much. And I'll be talking to Lynn Featherstone, who lost a family member, about that, the Liberal Democrat peer